Paul's point is, live your life in such a way that shows the world how you value the gospel of Jesus Christ. Let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ. So that sounds like familiar words for us. It sounds familiar because Paul says a similar thing in virtually every other letter that he writes. But his favorite way to put that is a little bit different. He likes to use the metaphor of walking. And I know that you are familiar with reading these words from Paul because he uses the metaphor of walking all the time. Colossians chapter 1, in verse 10, Paul says, walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. Or he writes to the Thessalonians in Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 12, walk in a manner that is fitting for the God who has called you. Or Ephesians chapter 4 verse 1, walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. So Paul likes to use phrases like this, and he likes to call to attention to the people that he's writing to that all these grand theological truths that he's writing to them, all of them have a practical place in their life. Paul is not just telling them things about God just so that they'll win at Trivial Pursuit. He's telling them these things about God so that their life will be affected by it. Let the manner of your life, let the walk of your life be affected by these truths that I am teaching to you. But he does like to use this metaphor of walking, but here he doesn't use that metaphor. He uses a little bit of a different phrase. He says, let the manner of your life. Now, those 5 words there are translating one word in the Greek. And that word in the Greek comes from the root polis, or polis, P-O-L-I-S. And what that word has to do with, it has to do with citizenship, or being a good citizen. Literally, Paul is saying, be good citizens, be worthy citizens. That word, the root of that word, we also get a lot of our words from that. The root again is polis, and we get words like politician or politics or metropolis or even police. A lot of things that have to do with civic duty and civic matters. And what Paul is really saying to them is, be good citizens, be worthy citizens. So why is it, do you think, that Paul would write the same kind of idea to everybody else and use one type of metaphor, but why is it that he would use here and only here this idea of being a good citizen as he writes to the Philippians? Why do you think that Paul would put it that way, be good citizens? Well, if you remember, Philippi was a Roman colony, which differentiated it from most of the ancient world. Most of the Roman Empire, the vast majority of people that lived in the Roman Empire were Roman subjects, not Roman citizens. But because Philippi was a Roman colony, its citizens were also Roman citizens. Now, in the ancient Empire of Rome, it was a big deal to be a Roman citizen. And the Philippians were very proud of the fact that they were Roman citizens. And if you know anything about your Roman history, you know that the Romans were really into this idea of good government and good citizens. In fact, our founding fathers took a lot of ideas from the Roman idea of government, because the Romans, they were pagan, they were secular, but they did get some things right about what it means to be a good government and a good citizen. And they felt that a good government was one which granted privileges and protected rights of its citizens. And in turn, its citizens received privileges from the government, but also had certain responsibilities towards that government. And so this idea of good government, good citizen, it comes from Rome. And a lot of that has filtered its way into modern ideas of government, particularly our modern idea of government. And so the Romans were really into this idea of a government that just wasn't looking out for itself, but was looking out for its people. Again, in a pagan, secular sort of way, but a government that protected the privileges of its people and from its people expected certain responsibilities, and sort of this symbiotic relationship between government and governed. And so the Philippians, again, remember, they were all about their Roman citizenship. The Philippians liked the fact that they weren't like everybody else. They were Roman citizens. In Philippi, There was a very Latin city. They spoke Latin there. They dressed like Romans. They wore the togas and everything. Their architecture was very Roman. It was like a little Rome. And so when Paul is writing to the Philippians and he's saying to them the same things that he says to the Ephesians, the Corinthians, the Thessalonians, the same things that he says to others, he puts it a different way. To the Philippians, he says, be good citizens. And he's sort of speaking their language. This would relate to them because they were all about that. They lived in a culture that was all about being good citizens and having good government. And so he's speaking their language. He says, be good citizens, but not of Rome, of a higher kingdom. We are citizens of a greater kingdom, Paul is saying. You are citizens of a far greater kingdom than Rome. And so Paul is calling them to act in ways that are good citizens of the eternal city, of the kingdom of God. And so he's just sort of speaking their language in that way. But he says to them, he says, let the manner of your life be worthy of the gospel of Christ. So a couple of things for us to look at there. And then I think we'll see Paul's meaning in all this. First of all, he calls them to be good citizens worthy of the gospel of Christ, the gospel of Jesus Christ. So in calling them to be worthy of this gospel, let's remind ourselves of the gospel that he's calling them to be worthy of. He's calling them to be worthy of this gospel in which sinful mankind, the enemy of God, is the recipient of the most amazing mercy and grace we can imagine. God Himself entered into His creation and became part of it so that He could suffer, be accused, and though He was completely without sin, He would go to the cross and be made to be sin. God would come while Jesus is on the cross. He would come and He would punish Jesus on the cross. The skies would darken. God would be there in judgment as Jesus was made to be sin, made to be your sin and my sin. And God then punishes Jesus so that the penalty for sin, which we could never pay, was then paid. So that by faith in Jesus, we receive His payment for our sin. But not only that, Jesus also lived the life that we should have lived. He lived the righteous, perfect, sinless life that would commend us to God, only we didn't live it. He lived it in our place. And so by faith in Christ, not only is His payment for our sin applied to us, His righteous life is credited to us, which then commends us to God. That is the gospel which Paul is calling for them to live in a manner worthy of. So let's think about this idea of being worthy of that gospel. When we think about worthy, there's two ways that we could think about being worthy. One way that we could think about being worthy is to merit or deserve. That's one meaning when we say be worthy of this, right? To merit something, to be deserving of something. You might say, that was really hard, but it was worth it. And what you mean is that the thing that you worked for deserved being worked hard for. Or you might say, he's worth his salt. And what you mean is that he is deserving of the wages that he's paid. So there's this idea of merit and deserving. Remember the movie Saving Private Ryan? Okay, I'm going to get the details wrong because it's been a while since I saw it. But the whole idea of the movie was there's this soldier. He had three brothers that had been killed in the war, and the military, big deals, big shots, decided to spare this mother and the bad press of a fourth casualty, that they needed to go in and extricate this Private Ryan from a particularly strategic part of Europe. And so they send all these soldiers in to find him and remove him. And how many was it was 6 or 7 others that died to get him out. And if you remember at the end or towards the end of the movie, I think it was a major that was leading that platoon. He is killed and he's about to die, and the Private Ryan is leaning over him, and he says to the man whose life just cost 6 other lives, he says, "Deserve this." And what he means is, go home and live a life that deserves what we did for you. Right? So that's one way that we can think of being worthy. But if that's what Paul is saying, then understand that we've just emptied the gospel of all its truth. We just ripped out of the gospel everything that Paul says about it. If we live a life that makes us deserving of the gospel that saved us, Jesus never needed to die. If we can live in a way that is worthy of what God has done for us, which is oftentimes what we want to do, we want to deserve what God has done for us because we're uncomfortable with grace. But if we can possibly live in such a way that deserves what God has done for us, then that is no gospel of grace at all. That's a gospel of earning back what God has forwarded to you. And so that can't be what Paul means. He can't mean live in such a way that makes you worthy of what Jesus did for you. Instead, what Paul is meaning, the idea of worth here is not merit or deserving, but value. What Paul is saying is, live in such a way that shows the world how you value the gospel of Jesus Christ. Live in such a way that shows everyone in your life the worth of the gospel of Jesus Christ in your life. And that is Paul's point here. Live in such a way that shows your value, how you attach worth to this gospel of Jesus Christ, which is another way of saying to live is Christ. So we all have things in our life that we value, right? And the way that we discern, the way that we know that we value something, there's lots of ways that we can look at our life and look at things in our life and assess how much we value things. And so I was thinking through, how is it that we value things and how can we see in our life what is of value to us? And I sort of brainstormed a few ideas here and put them in your notes, and we'll sort of walk through these. As we do this, think about the analogy of husbands. This analogy is pointed towards you, of taking your wife to dinner. And I'm sorry, ladies, if my analogies go towards men, but I am a man, so just reverse it. In your mind, just reverse it. So think of the analogy of taking your wife out to dinner. So how is it that you can show that you value your wife or that your wife has great worth to you? Well, you can look at what you're willing to give in order to have or to keep it. If there's a thing in your life that you value, then you can tell how much you value it by assessing how much you're willing to give to have it or to keep it, right? To put a price on it, to put a price tag, to put a number on it. So, husbands, you're taking your wife out to dinner. You can tell how much your wife is worth to you if you want to take her to Bojangles or if you want to take her to, I don't know what the most expensive restaurant in the town would be, but whatever that would be. If you want to take her to a $60 plate steakhouse, or if you want to take her down to Hardee's, right? That can let you know, okay, if she is worth this, then there is a worth that's attached to that. However, if I'm not willing to give that much, then I'm willing to give a little bit less, then that shows us a little less worth that we have in our mind. So there's one thing. Where would you take her to dinner? But also, number two, what joy or pleasure do we feel when the thing is possessed? What joy or what pleasure do we feel when that thing is possessed? And that helps us to know the value of that thing that we have for it. So you show up for dinner. You end up going to the best restaurant in town. You show up for dinner, and you sit through dinner, and you're in a bad mood. You had a bad day at work, and you never really get over that. And you're glad that dinner is over. You don't really have much to say. You go home, and that just wasn't that good of a meal. So, the joy that you experienced while the thing was possessed lets you know of the value the thing holds for you. On the other hand, you had a rotten day at work. You're in an awful mood. You got in a fight with your boss. You got in a fight with some coworkers. You got stuck in traffic. Had a flat tire on the way over. You're just in an awful mood. But then you sit down, and within a few minutes, everything changes. And now you're joyful, you're enjoying the time together, and it's just a delightful time. That lets you know the worth or the value of the thing sitting across from I hate to use this thing, of the person sitting across the table from you for dinner. Okay? It gives you an idea of the worth or the value because of the joy and happiness it brings to you. All right? So that's number 2. Here's a third one I thought of. What sadness or despair is felt when the thing is lost or threatened to be lost? How depressed do you get at the thought of losing? How devastating is it to think of losing a person or a thing in your life? That lets you know the value that holds in your heart. So you had dinner plans, and you're going to go out on Friday night. You find out about 3 o'clock on Friday that you're going to have to work late. You're not going to be able to make it. You're really frustrated and upset about that, but you're going to have to cancel your dinner plans. You call your wife, let her know, honey, can't make it tonight. Let's take a rain check. Hang up the phone. Don't think anything else about it. Oh, well. Or you spend the rest of the afternoon just glum, downhearted. I was really looking forward to that. To lose that brings me despair or sadness or even depression. That tells you what you value a thing or a person. The amount of despair or sadness or downheartedness that you feel when a thing is lost or threatened to be lost. Or number 4, what are we willing to risk in order to have a thing or keep a thing? What are you willing to risk to get it? That tells you the value of a thing in your heart. So, you got these dinner plans for Friday night. You've really been looking forward to going out with your wife. The boss tells you at 4 o'clock that you got to work late. Don't even make plans tonight. You're going to be here till 9 o'clock. So, you call your wife and you say, boss told me I had to work late, couldn't make dinner tonight, but meet me there. We're going anyway. And she says, no. You could lose your job. Don't care. It's worth it. It's worth it to see you tonight. Or, let's say you make plans to have dinner on Friday night with your wife, and then you find out at the last minute that there's a really good show coming on TV that you'd like to see. Honey, let's do it a different night. There's something coming on. I want to watch Jeopardy tonight. What you're willing to risk in order to have or keep it tells you how much you value it. If you're willing to risk everything, then you value that highly. If you're willing to risk little to have it or keep it, you value it lowly. And lastly, how much are our thoughts dominated by it? How much are our thoughts dominated? That tells you the worth or value of a thing. Right? You've been thinking about this dinner with your wife all week long. You just, all your spare time, you're making plans, you're making sure everything's just right. You're picking up your clothes at the cleaners, making sure there's a babysitter arranged. All the details are taken care of because you've been thinking about it all week. Or you forget you made the plans. You make reservations at 6 o'clock and at 5:30 you remember, oh, I forgot all about that because I haven't thought about it since Monday. The amount of time that you spend thinking or contemplating it also shows you the worth. Now, there's a point to all of this. Paul's point is, live your life in such a way that shows the world how you value the gospel of Jesus Christ. The Scriptures speak of this to us all the time. How much are you willing to give for it? Doesn't Jesus say, He tells the parable about the treasure in the field, and the man finds the treasure and he goes and sells everything he's got. Because that treasure is so valuable to him. Or what joy or pleasure do we feel when it's possessed? This whole letter is about the joy of the gospel in Paul's heart. Or in that same parable, the joy of the treasure that the man found. That's teaching us of our salvation. The sadness or despair that's felt when it's lost or threatened to be lost. That one's hard to apply because the gospel can't be lost. What are we willing to risk in order to have it or keep it? Paul's saying to the Philippians, you will show the world the value of the gospel by being willing to risk everything for it. How much are your thoughts dominated by it? The pleasure that we feel when we possess it, on and on, we see. These are ways to help us think through how we value the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because how we value the gospel of Jesus Christ tells us to what extent to live is Christ is true for us. Value the gospel little, and to live is not Christ. Value the gospel supremely, and to live is Christ. We live in a world that has its values all mixed up, don't we? Tony Campolo says this. He says it's like we've got all our price tags switched around. So imagine going in a store and all the price tags are switched. Think about like Best Buy. You can go in Best Buy, and Best Buy has things all over the place, from $399 to $3,999. So imagine going in there and price tags are switched. A $3.99 cell phone case, the price tag for that has now been put on the most high-end, expensive refrigerator that they have in the whole place. And that's like the world that we live in. Someone said that we know the price of everything but the value of nothing. So we live in this context in which the true value of things is hard to see. Our world likes to value trinkets highly while devaluing that which is really important. Paul's words to the Philippians, he's saying to them, you will demonstrate the worth of Jesus Christ by valuing Him in your culture. That can only be even more clearly seen in our culture today. By valuing the gospel of Jesus Christ highly, we show a culture around us the worth of our Messiah. We are, in other words, living for Christ. It's like an apple pie contest. Think about going to the state fair, or maybe you have apple pie contests around here. Think about an apple pie contest. And what happens is you got this table with all these apple pies that these people have baked, and you got these judges that are going and testing each apple pie, and then they declare one to be the winner. Now, what do they do for the winner? They take a blue ribbon, and where do they put the ribbon? On the pie. And does anybody in the whole place look at that pie with the blue ribbon on the edge of the plate and say, that pie just did a wonderful job making itself? Everyone knows the blue ribbon is not celebrating the pie, it's celebrating the maker of the pie. The blue ribbon doesn't say, what a wonderful pie, as though the pie is the end unto itself. It's saying the creator of this pie deserves the blue ribbon. And by Paul's way of thinking, he's saying the same thing. As you live in ways that show the world around you that you value the gospel, you're not putting a blue ribbon on yourself. The world will see you, and they won't say what a good person he or she is. They may say that, but as they get to know you, they will understand if to live is Christ for you, they will understand it's not what a good person this person is, because they value something else above all things. It's like a blue ribbon placed on you that's pointing the light right back to God. That is what Paul is saying when he says, live in a way that is worthy of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Think about this. I'm going to call this the spider web principle. And I guarantee that's the first time you've ever heard that, right? The spider web principle. So think about a spider web. Who has ever walked along somewhere and walked into a spider web? Everybody? So you know what that's like to be walking along and then boom, there's a spider web. What happens when you walk into a spider web? Yeah, you start doing all this crazy, start trying to get it out of your hair, off your clothes and everything, right? You're doing all this stuff to get the spider web off. What if someone was 20 feet away and saw you and they couldn't see the spider web? Now, we're smart enough to know, okay, that person just walked into a spider web. But assume that you don't know anything about spider webs. And you see someone walk into a spider web. And they start, just out of the blue, just doing this. You would think, what a strange person. Are they having a seizure? Do I need to call 911? What is going on with this person? Until you understand that they walked into a spider web. And then you say, oh, that explains it all. That explains the strange behavior. Now that I know that they walked into a spider web. Valuing the gospel is just like that. Others should see us and say, what a strange person. Why are they acting that way? Why are they sacrificing in that way? Why are they spending their time in that way? Until they understand the spider web. Now, if you don't like the spider web analogy, I almost went with the bee in a car. All right, you ever been in a car with a bunch of people and all of a sudden somebody sees a bee? So imagine you're driving down the road and the car behind you, there's a bee in the car. And you look over and everybody's doing all this, but you don't see the bee. And so you say, what in the world? I need to call the police. Until you know, oh, there's a bee in that car. That makes perfect sense. That's what Paul's getting at. Live your life in such a way that others, until they know this gospel that you value, they would look and say, I have no idea why that family gives so much of themselves to that. I have no idea why that family does this or acts that way. Until they are shown the spider web or the bee or the gospel that says, wow, now that makes perfect sense. To live my life in such a way that values the gospel in that way, that other people see me, and without knowing about that gospel, my life would make little sense to them.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Truth That Transforms with pastor and Bible teacher Jason Wilkerson. Truth That Transforms is the daily teaching broadcast of Disciples Fellowship Church. We invite you to visit our website, where you will find more resources to help in your journey of discipleship. You can find us at www.disciplesfellowshipnc.com or connect with our Facebook page at Facebook/DisciplesFellowshipNC. Truth That Transforms exists to glorify Jesus Christ through the teaching of His sanctifying and disciple-making Word.